So 105.7 Radio Metro, where it's all about the music. And right now, thanks to our sponsor, Event Cinemas, we are talking about films today. And I am absolutely privileged to be having a chat to writer, director, producer, all-around adventurer, Mr. Matty Hannon. How are you, Matty?
G'day, Adam. Yeah, doing well, thanks, mate. I'm down at the beach and yeah, feeling pretty good today.
Fantastic. Well, it's quite apt seeing that your film Road to Patagonia, it has surf involved in it. But could you give me a bit of a what your elevator pitch for this film is?
And at the crux of it, I think the Road to Patagonia is a love story. It's a love story between two people, but it's also more about a love story between humanity and the earth. And yeah, it's an adventure film. It's kind of investigative, philosophical film about how we as humans relate to the earth. And yeah, I feel like it's also a little bit of a surf film as well.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, you've got the tagline, a love story with a hoof beat, which is nice. Obviously, you got some horsey action in there. Do you want to describe a little bit about what happens there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So basically, I set off on an adventure from the top of Alaska in the Arctic Ocean down with the intent of heading down to the bottom of Patagonia on a motorcycle and trying to surf as much as I could along the way. And yeah, and then a whole bunch of things happened. And one of the main things was I met my partner in British Columbia on the way down. And yeah, it all just kind of transformed from there. She really affected my worldview. And I guess together we sort of hatched a bit of a wild plan to sell the motorbikes when we got to Chile. And we bought 4 horses instead. And yeah, set off on a big horse expedition with surfboards on the back as well. And yeah, and probably the best, well, I wouldn't say the best times of my life, but definitely one of the biggest highlights of my life so far has been on that horse adventure through Chile in late autumn and winter, hunting surf and just getting really close to the landscape and the people and nature. And yeah, it was beautiful.
It's just amazing, this film, Maddie. Like I must admit, I have watched it about 3 times because
Wow.
every time that I've seen it, I've found something different, and I've shared it with my young daughter who's 20, and she just loved all the messages that you had there. I mean, my fascination with this film is that you spent 16 years getting to this point. Was this always the master plan for you, Maddie? I mean, you've shot
Nah.
a few other docos in between there, I know, but this seems like a massive passion project.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's definitely not a commercial venture. It's one of those ones where yeah, you're never really gonna make the money back on all the time that you spent pulling it together. But it yeah. So yeah, 16 years ago, I was living in the Mentawai Islands of Sumatra, and I picked up a video camera there in order to be able to document and share with my family why I'd lived there for 5 years. They couldn't really picture what it was like over there, I suppose. And it was before social media or any of the kind of connective apps that we've got these days, and before smartphones. And so I went back to school in Melbourne actually and did a master's in filmmaking, and then from there, yeah, I never really set out to make this film per se. It just all kind of happened. And I did mean to document the trip from Alaska down to Patagonia. But I thought I was going to be able to just make a little YouTube or Vimeo half-hour or 20-minute film, who knows,
Yeah.
and just quickly edit it, put it on the internet, and be done with that and move on to the next chapter of my life. I definitely had no idea that I was going to be spent, the next 10 years of my life essentially figuring out how to finish a feature film and then release it, because it's not an easy task in the documentary world, especially. I think there's not a lot of money there to get things finished.
No, and I suppose you're lucky you've had that national distribution with Garage Entertainment, I suppose, which is been massive for you. I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, quite late in the game actually. So I I'd already done about 8 months of film festivals before I got chatting with Madman and Garage, and yeah, and then Jamie from Garage Entertainment really kind of gave us a good rundown of their plans and how they normally work, and it was yeah, it made all the sense to team up with them. They've got all the experience and the contacts, and it's been a pleasure working with those guys, helping see the film, getting shared out into the public domain a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, I mean, it's interesting. I read a quote about how the Surfers Journal of the US classed you as a passionate and ridiculous, adventurous guy with an absurdity, on the brink of absurdity, which I thought was really interesting. Is that something that you put yourself out there for, Maddie? Like, do you? I mean, you're passionate, but
Ah, yeah, yeah. I know. I'm not sure. I think, yeah, I guess it's kind of a, yeah, maybe not a backhanded compliment at all. I think they mean it in a good way. They're lovely people at the Surfers Journal. I wouldn't say I aim for absurdity.
Hmm,
I do appreciate absurdity.
hmm.
Tom Robbins is one of my favorite writers, and I think a lot of people would say that he's got an absurd kind of style. But no, yeah, I am passionate, and I'd like to keep adventure in my life. That's definitely a core tenet of where I like to see my life and my family's life continue, just keeping the curiosity of the world alive. And yeah, yeah,
Beautiful.
that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, great. I just want to circle back to the collaborators that you had on this project, because obviously it takes, many people to build a village, and you had quite an extraordinary. Even though you were doing a lot of this solo, like I'm assuming, like a little bit of cinematography with with Heather as well, with the horses, using
Mhm.
a lot of GoPros and so on and so forth. But the back end, it sounds like you've had a lot of support. Did you have the editor of Mad Max 2 assist you on the editing process here?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Mike Bolson. Yeah,
Wow.
he's a legend and a gentleman, and yeah, he was instrumental actually in getting the film finished. As you can imagine, tackling a mountain of footage. I think the journey itself was about 2.5 years long, and so by the time we finished, there was just a mountain of footage. And because I never really set off with any particular story in mind, I mean, I knew the themes I wanted to look at in the film, but at the same time, I had no idea what would actually make the film, what wouldn't. And so I interviewed way more people than what I ever thought I would, and followed storylines that, obviously never made it into the film, and kind of that verite style of filmmaking that just by necessity means you've got to record um, a, a lot of material to be able to weave together a good film at the end. And so yeah, it was really intimidating facing that mountain of footage, but I guess I got through 3/4 of it alone, and then at about that 3/4 mark, I received funding from a some investors over in the US, and so that really helped and allowed me to bring on board Mike Bolson, who yeah, he was just someone who he was just an amazing mentor, really, and an inspiration too, in the sense that he'd done all this amazing film work himself, but he had this great ability to be able to kind of coax what I was wanting to say out of me, if that makes
Yeah,
sense, rather than
absolutely.
dictating how it should be.
Mm.
He was he, he was kind of like a sophisticated documentarian in that way, in that how a good interviewer can elicit good responses without you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And
100%.
yeah, so
Mm.
it was just really beautiful process working with him actually, and he really kept bringing things back to you know if ever I was at a crossroads with material, or whether or not we should delete this scene or whatever, he would always question, well, what felt true to you? What's the truth in this? And there was always this kind of like truth as a bit of a compass in the documentary process, which I thought was really nice, because I don't think that's always the case, especially these days with, whatever, what some documentaries are bordering on reality TV and vice versa. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I wanted to touch on that as well, if I can, Maddie, because yeah, I did see that Michael was sort of also credited as a writer on this as well, obviously as part of the story process for you to create it. But for you, some of the inspirations for coming down this line. I mean, when I was watching this, I had moments that I'm like, is this like a David Attenborough crossed with like, I felt Albie Mangles like just like smacked me in the face. I was just like, I grew up watching, him, the Leyland brothers in the 80s, and it was really, quite instrumental. Did you have some touchstones that you went, I want it to be similar to this and not like this?
Yeah, I did. Funnily enough, I've actually never seen any of Albie Mangle's stuff, which I feel terrible about. Because yeah, you're not the first person that's drawn the comparison, and I know who he is. He's obviously a trailblazer in this kind of world, and I really need to sit down and watch some of his stuff and familiarize myself. Yeah, I mean, from I love being out in nature, and I guess wildlife photography was something that I was always really interested in, and so that kind of wildlife aspect to the film was just something that you look at the big productions like anything from the BBC or whatever, is obviously they're always super inspiring. They're the top tiers of and any of that kind of filmmaking. But I also found yeah, I think I really like the personal stories in documentaries. For me personally, I find that central character, or where you can kind of experience a subject or a topic through a protagonist and a narrative arc, usually, not always, but for me, usually tends to be a bit more engaging and maybe a little bit more memorable, and it can take you on that emotional journey a little bit more than, your typical essay film. And so, yeah, that was the reasoning behind putting myself in the film, and also making the film to begin with. The film wasn't the number one priority. It was very much a healing journey for me as well. So living in Melbourne, I'd kind of lost my way after having lived in Sumatra for about 5 years, and it had been such a culture shock coming back to Melbourne and finding myself in a corporate lifestyle after living in the jungle for all that time. And so, yeah, it was. I found myself in a really dark place, to be honest. And so, going on this big journey was my means of being able to find myself again and heal myself. And the film, because I'd already gone to school and done that master's degree, I was like, well, I should film this because this is what I want to do. But so it was a bit of a mix between a kind of personal journey that I had to undertake for my own healing, and as well as any kind of filmic ambition. And and so yeah, I also really like those nitty gritty, low budget documentaries, the ones that you can really tell that people have fought tooth and nail to finish and make happen. I think I find those kinds of films really inspiring. So
absolutely. And the really interesting thing I found with the structure of this, like, when I started to watch, I'm like, am I watching a horror film? Like it was a bit of music, stabs of music, the cuts to black, the flash frames, the fires, and then the scene in Mexico. I was just like, whoa, this is really full on. So yeah, the mix of genres was really interesting. Obviously, that was a stimulant for you. You went, okay, we need to, get a bit of stimulation going.
yeah. I mean, I think it is a bit of a clash of different genres of filmmaking, because um, I mean, I'm not trying to say it's the first of its kind by any means, but it's a little bit surf film. It's a little bit social issue or social justice, environmental documentary, and it's a little bit adventure film as well. And so it doesn't really neatly fit into any of the typical genres, I suppose. And yeah, as far as editing styles go, yeah, I'm not really sure how we came there. It just was like a natural process, just something with it. Um, yeah, and even including the animation there at the halfway point. I'm not sure if you remember that,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
that's something that kind of would maybe be frowned upon by traditional documentarians. You know that, well, maybe not. I don't know. But it's not typical of
No.
documentaries to kind of like break the the story like that with an immersive. I kind of don't really want to give that part of the film away, but
No, definitely
yeah,
not. No, I think this film needs to be experienced. I think it's very hard to talk about because it is such an emotional journey, and it started off with such a personal journey to you. And I want to circle back around that you mentioned about the music, playing a big part in this. The music, the soundtrack of this is absolutely phenomenal. I love it. Can you talk a little bit about the musical choices and your collaborations on this?
yeah. So Daniel Norgren is the musician who his body of work basically fills out the soundtrack for the film. I think there's about 35 tracks of his in the film, and then there's several, maybe five other tracks from five other artists that contributed one track each. And uh, yeah, I mean, it's such a big choice, isn't it? With any filmmaking, the sound is half, if not more, of the experience. And so I knew that I wanted to spend at least half of my budget of the post-production budget on the music for the film, because to me that's just such an important element to it, and especially for that emotional journey. Very often I find it's the music that gives them emotion. And yeah, so when I heard Daniel Norgren's work, it was I wasn't really familiar with him until a couple of years into editing the film, and then one day he just came on the radio, and I listened to the next song and the next song and the next song. I was like, oh my gosh! And each one, it was like it was like we'd both been making a film and making music together about the same story, but we'd never heard of each other, you know. And so I wrote to him, and I sent him a link to the film, and I said, look, I'm over in Australia. He's from Sweden. And I said, your music's just incredible. I'm working on this film. If you're interested, would you like to take a look and let me know if you'd want to get involved? And yeah, he wrote back straight away and said he'd love to. And yeah, I obviously paid him. I gave as much as I could. But in the scheme of things, our budget was pretty minimal compared to what guys like him are used to probably working with. And so, yeah, I feel very grateful that he's on board. And it was at that point that I realized that we could make something that could be quite special to a few people. And yeah. So, and then we've got some other great artists in there, like Lisa O'Neill, who's an amazing Irish musician. And she's got a really beautiful, rebellious folk sound and ethos to her music. And she's got the final scene.
Stunning.
And
That made my daughter
yeah,
cry. Made my daughter cry. By the way, she cried. You know. So
yeah,
you're
sorry about
working the
that.
emotional pull of music and imagery was really worked there.
Yeah. So yeah, very happy with the music. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So I guess just to sort of wrap things up a little bit, I mean that I could talk to you for ages, Matty, about all the different themes that are in this film. But as I said, I think it's something that people need to experience themselves and the evolution of this film on the screen. Obviously, not that you also experienced in the edit, but for you,
Hmm.
what do you want people to walk away from this film, either thinking, feeling, or doing?
Yeah. Probably all three of those.
Mm.
Um, Feeling, I'd like them to walk away with a feeling of feeling uplifted, and that there's so much beauty still left in the world. Thinking, I'd like people to think that our own mindsets aren't always inherently what we're engendered into thinking they are, if that makes sense. That's not the best sentence, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's different worldviews out there that are worth considering, and that the the mainstream global modern capitalist worldview isn't the only one out there. And while it's brought us a lot of great things in the world as far as conveniences and technology and comfort and those sorts of things, I'd like people to think about other worldviews and cultures that offer a lot more in the way of connection to nature and sustainability and community as well. And I think that would really help people, especially if you're like myself and you've experienced bouts of depression and that sort of thing in the past, and that can really help. Doing, I don't know. I think anything from your outdoor activities of going surfing, right? Floating down a river or hiking a mountain, all those things are so important. But if you can find space to go and sit and close your eyes and turn off your phone and just listen and give yourself the time to actually just drop into everything that's going on around you, the wind over your skin and the cicadas in the background and and all that stuff that can kind of fall into the background with our busy lives. It's hard to communicate in a radio interview, but it's really meaningful, and finding that connection to nature, I think, is such a special thing. So that would be what I recommend.
No, I think that's fantastic, because that's exactly. I kind of wanted to sign a petition or go and jump up and down and throw my hands up at something after I watched your film, but I also wanted to go out and go for a walk through a rainforest or something along those lines, just to get back in touch with nature. So I think you've definitely got your goals achieved there, Matty. So congratulations.
Thanks.
No, and so it's really exciting. So for those people that do want to see Road to Patagonia, we've got a Q&A screening on the 22nd of February at Event Cinemas at Pacific Fair. I know that Matty's doing a huge amount of screenings all over the country and all over Queensland. But I will definitely be there. I'm really excited to see Matty talking about this film more. The Road to Patagonia, going to be screening 22nd of February at Event Cinemas Pac Fair. Matty, thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations. I can hear the little chirp of seagulls in the background. So clearly the next interview is on the way, I think.
Exactly. I think it's about time to get back in the ocean. I was lucky to fit it in. But lovely to meet you, Adam. Look forward to meeting you in the flesh. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matty.
Cheers, mate. Have a good one.